My name is Joel Ong. Hi, I'm an assistant professor in computational arts at York University in Toronto. I also direct a faculty research unit entitled Sensorium, the Center for Digital Art and Technology. Um, but today, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much, Manisha, for the invitation to be able to hang out with you for a couple of hours with my really good friend Mick. So, um, yeah, I want to start off by just talking a little bit about myself, but not so much in an academic sense, which you would expect from an event like this, but more about who I kind of really am. And I was really inspired a couple of weeks ago by a presentation by Dylan Robinson, who from Queens, who where he basically said it's really important to start off by knowing who you are, where you come from, where you are, and what your ancestry is. So he basically asked the question, who's your mom and where are you from? So my mother's name is Polly Swan, and she, like my dad, are third generation settlers in Singapore. My great grandmother traveled to Singapore in the 1920s from the Fujian province in China to work in construction. She was one of the early Samsui women who literally bore the weight of the entire civilization on her back. She and my grandfather lived through the Second World War and the Japanese occupation in the 1940s. And after my father and mother were born, we basically saw our nation move between Japanese rule, British rule, Malaysian rule, and finally to independence in 1967. So defining a coherent cultural and national identity is a burden I carry with me through my travels, since I, like many of us, have been settlers in so many places and inherited so many narratives. It's really hard to find out where we fit in. But I now call Takaranto my home, that is covered by a Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I recognize that I have adopted many of the benefits of this society as a foreigner and uninvited guest, and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to work and raise my family in the communities that have grown in the treaty lands. I'll hand us over to Mick right now.
Yeah, thank you, Manisha, for the invitation, and thank you, Joel, also for the invitation to join this workshop. And my name is Mick Larusso. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I'm based in Los Angeles, and my work is focused on the relationship of cells, societies, environments, and looking at kind of the way in which energy and information runs through all of those realms, and thinking about the mystery of life and how it kind of emerges from those relationships. Um, I have some early training in microbiology and got my MFE at San Francisco Art Institute, and I'm a member of the UCLA Art Site Collective and the SciArt NanoLab. And I'm currently on the Tongavar land, so I acknowledge my presence on this ancient, ancestral, and current homeland of the Tongva people, who are the traditional custodians and caretakers of Tongavar, which is also known as the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands. And yeah, I'd actually forgotten about the mother and grandmother part, but yeah, my mother is she was actually born on a ranch in Arizona, and to my grandmother, who was a cowgirl, kind of a self-made woman who left upbringing on the East Coast to pursue a life as a cowgirl, as a kind of rebel of the time. And I definitely have been formed by those practices and their relationship to the native tribes, the Dene, also known as Navajo people in that area, and the Hopi have been a big part of forming who I am today. So.
So without further ado, we're going to start the first part of the presentation, which actually is a short performance entitled Prismatic Microbial Stories. It was first presented in an event called Art and Science of Storytelling, hosted by the Pomona College just last week. So It's short. It's about 10 minutes, maybe slightly over it, and we'll have a little chat after that. Okay, thanks so much.
We live in a microbial world. By now you probably know already that microbes are everywhere. In the 21st century, we humans have gained an ample appreciation of the utmost importance of microbial life. Since 2020, we have a much keener relationship with our personal microbiome in the way it facilitates the attraction and repulsion of other microbes, both helpful and harmful. We are also aware that they dapple every surface of our cities, navigating air and water currents, congregating around the roots of trees, on our skin, and our proximal spaces. If observation is said to bring the observed into existence, what can we share about our relationships to microbes through this focused view? What stories can we tell? What sounds may we hear? What traces may we discover? We enter a full spectrum view of the world with quotes from the book Prismatic Ecologies, edited by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, who writes, "Breaking monochromatic light into a multitude of colors offers a suggestive entryway into non-anthropogenic ecologies. Color marks a restlessness, an inherent vivacity within matter, where oikos is not so much a bounded home as an ever unfinished world." End quote.
Scene 1. Brown. Quote, "Brown is the color of intimate contact between human bodies and the non-human world." End quote. I am the soil that consists of living entities of worms, bacteria, fungi, minerals, and plant matter. The soil becomes my gut through the plants that I harvest from the garden, becomes my cells, becomes my thoughts. This dirt you see comes from Chimayo in New Mexico, a Catholic site of pilgrimage. People visit the small adobe church nestled close to the mountains to gain a portion of the earth from a small hole in a side chapel. Sometimes they place dirt directly on themselves at the hole, eat it, or take it to a loved one. The dust is said to have miraculous curative properties. Hundreds of crutches hang on the walls, leading to the dirt, suggesting that hundreds or even thousands have been instantly healed of their disabilities upon applying the sacred dust. Thousands of photos of people in need of prayers cover an adjacent wall, along with rosaries, images of saints, and benches for prayer. Maybe some of the curative properties of the Chimayo dirt also come from its microbiome.
Scene 2. Red. A Martian red, the red of attention, the red of urgency, disruptance, and rupture. According to the second chapter of Genesis, quote, "The first man was a clod of red earth, Adamah in Hebrew, part of a semantics constellation that includes Edom, red, and Dam, blood, animated by divine breath. While other species differ from humans in their behaviors and bodily forms, their essential likeness becomes vividly evident when the shared substance of life spills from the body. Blood bespeaks corporeal vitality at the point of its vulnerability, life in its capacity to die." End quote. In Antarctica, blood red water gushes over the white surface of Taylor Glacier into Bonny Lake, a startling intervention that sulfur and iron cycling microbes produce. Last week, NASA's Perseverance mission began to rove Jezero crater on Mars, where red dirt dominates a once watery landscape. What ancient microbes might have thrived in this iron-rich environment of our neighboring planets?
Scene 3. Green. The green of algae and plants, fertility, the green of planetary systems, the green of capitalism. Quote, "Green dominates our thinking about ecology like no other, as if the color were the only organic hue, a blazon for nature itself." End quote. Green is found in the hue of cyanobacteria that appeared about 2.4 billion years ago, making oxygen from the sun. They made architectures too, stromatolites, Glacially domed microbial cities emerging from the ocean, still seen alive and in fossils. The oxygen they spewed into the atmosphere as a byproduct of photosynthesis killed off almost anaerobic microbes on Earth at that time. Eventually, the cyanobacteria became the sugar and oxygen producing cores of plants, partners in our plant and animal dance.
From the novel Greener Than You Think, a scientist invents a fertilizer that inadvertently enables grass to take over the world. In a caricature of the Green Revolution of the 20th century, she says, "I want no more backward countries, no more famines in India or China, no more dust bowls, no more wars, depressions, hungry children. For this I produced the metamorphoser, to make not two blades of grass grow where one sprouted before, but whole fields flourish where only rocks and sand piles lay. Plants will be capable of making use of anything within reach, rocks, quartz, decomposed granite, anything." End quote.
Scene 4. Blue. The blue of sky, the blue of the blue planet, the blue of the ocean to the purple violets of its depths. An excerpt from Polaramonas Eolata and Wind Eagle. On this day, the sky is clear and blue, and the wind seems to whisper a lullaby as Polaramonas Eolata waits for her turn at the edge of a drop. Within seconds, the wind has lifted, a familiar rustle that graduates through the grains of sand and dust around her. With a gasp, she falls into the arms of Wind Eagle, a slim unicellular body lifting effortlessly off the ground, and, half falling, half drifting, swings into the currents of the ether, just as the ground beneath her breaks apart. The terrain is hilly, rough, and inhospitable. Through the mouths of crevices, Polaramonas Eolata listens to Wind Eagle's stories of magical landscapes. She has long heard about the cloud cities, vast spaces that seem to supply and sustain millions. In her imagination, their lines and networks converge at infinity in a sort of symphony, each line stretching out across vast scales, vibrating with imminent tension and resonance, colors and textures. Wind Eagle flaps his wings, summoning a giant gust of wind. Today, Polaramonas Eolata lifts into the air, riding the fastest and steepest currents, and finds her new home in the clouds. Scene 5. Purple. Halobacteria use the purple pigment bacteriorhodopsin to capture the abundantly green spectrum of light for energy, and might have been dominant on Earth before cyanobacteria, casting the planet in a purple glow.
Scene 6. Colorless, off-white. Goethe was the first to describe architecture as frozen music. Through an indivisible connection, sound, space, and environment inform each other, implicating all materiality as a sonic witness.
Of course, not all ice is white, and not all translucency is benign. In the same way, in this age of the Anthropocene, not one process of transmutation in the natural world is untainted.
As the melting glaciers and permafrost join into black seas of organic and inorganic assemblages, how are these stories of violence, pollution, engineering, and extinction revealed?
What is nature but the reduction of non-human beings to their aesthetic appearances for humans? Compared to the range of the electromagnetic and the acoustic spectrums, our sensory apparatus are as good as colorless, off-white, opaque, to the wonders of the natural world that reside in the bodies of our non-human companions.
What microbes dwell in the swirling, muddy spectrum of life, producing and consuming colors, adjusting to the rapid changes accelerated by human influence?
What lies beneath or beyond a nature distinguished by brown, red, green, blue, and purple, colors that we have brought today through the processes of light refraction and melting snow? And what stories encapsulate the true spectrum of seeking life? Thank you. Okay, cool. So what we wanted to do, I think, is um, talk through a little bit about what was going on just now and get some responses from you. As mentioned, this was something that we were inspired by to write um, based on a prompt that was around storytelling between the arts and the sciences, right? And that's something I think that's close to everybody's hearts over here. How do you see, I guess, life as a story? How do you see the things around us as a kind of story? And for us, the way we were looking at it, we were thinking about the metaphors of color, the symbolisms of color as well. What can we pull from what we know about color and what we feel about color, about tone, about texture, about ambience, maybe, and how can we shape that into the story? Um, Maybe I'll just open it if anybody has any questions at all. Maybe we can take one or two questions and then we'll move on to a presentation.
I have a question. So when you're thinking about metaphors around color, I really appreciated how that's a really interesting entryway into microbial life. That's something that's very apparent when you look under the microscope and you can see color. How did you approach the ambient feedback and the noise, for example, that was tied with the present with the performance into that idea of color? Did you have any, I guess, limitations you put on yourself during the composition process, or how did you kind of pull that theme through to the music itself?
Thanks for asking that. So there's actually it's interesting because there's not that much that's going on under the hood, unfortunately. There's a computer vision algorithm which is just sensing the dominant colors. And in general, you sense about 5 or 6 dominant colors, but then in this case, I'm only doing 2. And so what happens is every time something moves, there'll be a shift in that. And those changes are sent to a patch in Super Collider that shifts up a sine tone up and down as it goes along. And so every time there's a shift that passes a threshold, there'll be another like a sawtooth kind of sound coming across your headphones. And that's pretty much it. I wanted to set it up so that we would be able to so-called play with whatever was going on under the microscope and have the sound just kind of independently move and react to what was going on there. Thanks. Okay. So yeah, I think there'll be a lot more time for conversations. So if you don't, if you guys are okay with it, I think I'm just gonna move on to the PowerPoint part of the the presentation. So let me get started again. This computer is becoming a bit like a playground. That of which I have no clue what it is now, since Toronto is still in this stay-at-home thing. Okay. If anything's not clear at any time, please do let me know. Don't hesitate to stop me in my tracks and seek clarification. So this is the talk entitled Ecologies and Resonances of Proximity. There was a previous title that was very verbose and, and hard to understand, but it encapsulated some of Mick and my um, joint interest in nanotechnology and thinking about things at a scale that is imperceptible. So a kind of post-perspectival space. As we were going through some of the ideas that were, ebbing and flowing over the course of, what's going on around us with COVID-19 and the different stages of lockdown, isolation, being outside, and then not anymore, saying hi to your friends, and then not. we felt, or at least I felt very strongly that my identity was kind of being changed, and it wasn't very. It felt like a little bit of a disjunct to talk more about like an academic pursuit as it did to talk about how we were kind of getting on with life at this point, and how that was feeding into the artistic works that we have been thinking about in the last month or 2 months. So Ecologies and Resonances of Proximity really comes out of a project that we did entitled Proximal Spaces that was shown at the Toronto Design Festival last month. And it was actually a big team of bio artists that came together and started thinking about what are our companion species within these concentric circles of proximities to the body. So if we think about proximal spaces, the notion of proxemics was something that was talked about quite a lot in the 50s and 60s. And there was an anthropologist called Edward Hall who defined proxemics. And he did these beautiful diagrams, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes, that showed these concentric circles away from the body. And we wanted to think about them from a microbial perspective and think about what different bacteria are actually in those spaces. So we have that project that I'll show you in a couple of minutes. But right now, this is a fuller picture of, I guess, who I am. I have to put that in, I guess, since I've, oh, it's, since I am from York, I am at the Department of Computational Arts, the School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design, as mentioned. And some of the current projects that I'm invested in include atmospheric microbiome projects, proximal spaces, as mentioned. I also do an improvisational series called Void Ambience, and our latest iteration of that is called Latency, where we take latency data in real time from the networks, and we use that as compositional parameters in sound. So there are 3 of us, and usually we have a network of about 5 or 6 computers that we are constantly pinging and seeing what the network delays are. And we use those times as compositional, compositional parameters for our music. I also teach mainly data visualization practices, but creative data visualization. So the tension between information design and a creative form of data visualization, or maybe a creative / multi-sensory form, is something I'm really interested in. As mentioned, I also direct Sensorium, which is the organized research unit for digital arts and technology, where we host meetings such as this. And in any other time, we would definitely be inviting Manisha over to talk about her experiences curating this amazing series, and maybe poach some of your speakers as well. But we also are a bunch of curators. We basically have about 8 or 9 labs that we oversee, both thematically and also administratively. These researchers who have really amazing research careers as well, we basically work with them to help them out with grants and to help them out with organizing knowledge mobilizations events and all that stuff. So our latest event was a group exhibition at Isaiah last year in Montreal, called Life as Sensorium, and it featured works from our members from VR, physical installation, and it was actually quite a great broad range. Of course, it was done virtually. So if you go to our website, sensorium.ampd.yorku.ca, you'll see some of these examples. Yeah, okay. So enough of that introduction. I guess when we're thinking about proximal spaces, it's a real amazing thing to think about how we're connected almost instantaneously right now. Mick, are you still in Echo Park right now, Mick? Okay.
Yes,
Echo
yes.
Park. Okay. Me, I'm in Toronto, and I didn't really know where Manisha and the rest of you guys are. So I guess University of Alberta is a close enough point. But it's really interesting to think about the positionality of these conversations, and the fact that there is some telematic magic that's going on, where I'm sitting down here having a private conversation with myself, and my computer. But behind that computer, where there's air and basically nothingness, there is this very complex and intense conversation that's going on. And the sound of my voice is actually activating certain neurons and receptors in your body and in your brain, hopefully. And, there's this kind of connection that's taken place. And, well, at least for me, I used to live in a city that had a lot of perpetual movement. Everywhere we went, things would be moving really, really fast. And the moment the lockdown happened, it was a time for us to be quiet, and to really almost like slow down, So this is a quote that has carried me for a long time, I think. In silence, time does not move, but vibrates gently on the spot. It is slowed down on my body, whose time it's become. And it's really amazing when you slow down and you start realizing how much your body becomes an inscription of the time that's passing by. Your body starts to note the changes in air currents, for instance, in the spaces that you are. Your ears start to be more sensitive to the sounds around you, and your eyes pick up the faintest details that you wouldn't. And obviously, these sensory stimuluses go into your brain and create these really interesting thoughts and memories and imaginations. So this is the project that I started the presentation talking about. This is Proximal Spaces that were shown at Design TO Festival this year. On the left, you will see Edward Hall's Proxemics diagrams. You'll see in the center the top-down view of a person in his intimate space, or his or her intimate space, that goes up from 1.5 feet to 4 feet to 12 feet to 25 feet. And obviously, these numbers are very closely related, somewhat closely related to the social distancing that we have today. And so it was really interesting to think now, okay, there are these demarcations of social and public space, and similar demarcations of what kinds of communication happens in these spaces itself. How do you react when somebody enters your personal space? Is there a fight or flight response that's activated? Something like that, Edward Hall spoke about that. But I was really interested to see now if we can think about the companion species in that proximal spaces, in those concentric circles, then we would be able to think about communication twofold in two different ways. One of it was to think about how not alone we are in our 6-foot bubble, and that we were actually teeming with microbes, we were teeming with bacteria, we were teeming with organisms you don't otherwise see. And then the second one was really to see like where your traces are around your immediate vicinities. Because bacteria don't observe any kinds of 6-foot rule. Obviously, the air doesn't observe any of these rules. As you can probably know, a lot of people have been talking about the sneeze and the number of layers of PPE that you actually have to wear to curb that. It's not 6 feet, it's way more than that in certain circumstances, right? So in the same way, we wanted to recast this diagram as a contagion map, almost. So we teamed up with a bio artist, Elaine Whittaker, who's been doing these beautiful pandemic drawings, and we had a round of designing how we would put some of these drawings as a growth from the internal side of from the inside of the circle to the outside of it, just to show how you would leave your traces on the environment around you. I'm going to jump real quick to the website, just so we can so I can show you and maybe whet your appetite a little bit, so you can take a look at that on your own time as well. So it's just proximalspaces.com. You will see a landing page that actually has a 3D model of a biofilm. The about page is the gray, the brown ball. But these are the visualizations that we came up with. So you've seen this. This is the when you do a close-up, what basically it is these petri dishes that have been seeded with. Oh, I totally forgot to explain how these were derived. Okay, sorry about that. I'm going to go to about then. Let's not jump the gun. I got excited. So basically, we got together a team of international bioartists, and we gave them a very simple prompt. In these proximal spaces, or in these concentric circles from your body, can you swab these surfaces and then plate them on a petri dish, and let's see what grows. So each bioartist had a series of petri dishes for each space. So I think there were about 4 different tiers, starting from 1.5 all the way to 12 feet, and then they plated it on these petri dishes, and then they sent it over to us, and we put it in a visualization map. So some of them look really amazing. These are roughly corresponding to 6 feet, and those are the 12 feet ones. And a lot of times, you know, you would find that they really are the same across. You know, just basically, a lot of people were taking these readings, and call them readings, I guess, around their domestic spaces, spaces that they actually frequented. So there was a history of their microbiomes on these places as well. So you would see some colonies that were pretty similar. We also did some aesthetic experiments. This was a Penrose algorithm that we put some of these images into so that they could move around a little bit and see it in an interesting visual way. The other thing we did was we actually had an AR part of it where we wanted to make Elaine's drawings come to life to a certain extent. So we had some of my students who are really excellent 3D modelers. They put some of her drawings into 3D form, and then we put it into an AR app where if you moved around, you could actually see your breath triggering these, spawning these, they call them snort. And these snorts would actually contribute to a biofilm that would be pretty much clouding the environment around you. Yeah. So that's us kind of working on it. Okay, so that's that project. It's easy to get back to. Yep. Okay. Okay. So moving along. Interestingly, I think when we think about distance, when I first arrived in Perth in 2009, I think, to start my master's in biological arts at Symbiotica, which is a really amazing place. If you want to do bio art, that's pretty much the place to do it. But you know, I came in as a kind of, you know, I did ecology before that, so I had these grandiose ideas of art making and bio art making being centered around like beauty and how everything is really amazing, and the sun is beautiful in the morning, stuff like that. But you know, a lot of it was about relearning or investigating how these relationships were happening between doctor and patient to begin with. So one of the earliest experiments that I started doing was to train myself to hear through a stethoscope. This was a residency that we did that I did at the Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts. And I called it Auscultation 101, but the most interesting experiments came not so much in the sound part of it, but actually in the physical manipulations of the stethoscope. Because I mean, as most of you may know, right, already, that the stethoscope was created so that you know, doctors would have this physical distance between themselves and the patient, and we wouldn't have to worry about I guess, these really uncomfortable situations where you were so close to somebody's chest, and that was one side of it. So essentially getting just trimming the stethoscope created a whole bunch of new interactions between doctor and patient, played here by Tarsh Bates and her friend. And also, elongating it started to chip away at these hierarchies or power or knowledge hierarchies between doctor and patient. Because it's always the doctor who places the stethoscope where he or she wants to hear, and they're basically in the know of what's going on in your body, whereas you don't always know. And this wasn't the case before the stethoscope was invented, right? Every time somebody would ask you, how are you? Your voice would be the most important way of determining how you were. But in the advent of the stethoscope, it turned out that the most informative sound became the heartbeat and the lungs and everything else that you could hear. So I was really interested in the cultural conditions around that. And this kind of leads into what Jonathan Stern has been talking about hearing and listening as being two separate things. Hearing, of course, is necessary. You need sound to be hitting eardrums. There's a physical thing. But listening seems to be something else, right? And when I was doing this experiment in auscultation, I realized that there was a really amazing book, or it's actually just a chapter by Tom Rice in the Erotic Journal, where he had this story, fictional story about a doctor who listened to, so the doctor hires a prostitute, right, and brings her back to a hotel room, and the prostitute says, okay, so what are we going to do now? And he says, well, no, just sit down and don't worry about anything, just lie down. And he takes out his stethoscope and he literally drinks in the sound of her heart. And the sensory experience that was depicted in that novel was really, really amazing, because that's something that you don't really think about when there's an instrument, a listening apparatus that is primed for information retrieval or extraction, right? So keep that in mind for a few minutes. This idea of a logic of extraction, right? And the idea of positionality, again, just things just starts to focus on where you are in the sounding space, right? Where you are in relationship to the sounding body. And so this is Bernard Leitner's amazing installation in 2006, where he has these sounds moving around you in a really interesting way. And the cool part about it is not so much that it's serpentine, or that the sounds are great as high fidelity speakers. It's that when you move around the space, it actually changes around you. So it becomes this dance, really, that these sounds, whether or not the speakers are static, they do this thing where they bounce across walls, they bounce across bodies, they get trapped in hair, clothes, textures, etc. And they basically do these, interesting unfolding when you go into the room. So every time you go in there and every time you have a moment of listening, it's different, right? And I think there's some beauty in that, and there's some reverence in that moment. So the I guess the educator in me just just says, well, sounds journey in space. That's right. Okay, so it's influenced by the patterns of the source. If you're clapping, it vibrates off your hands and vibrates the air, of course, and it reflects off different surfaces. So if you have interesting surfaces on your right, they basically have different diffraction patterns. And it's interesting to think about this as a compositional parameter. In Lamont Young's Dream House, for instance, in New York City, I hope maybe some of you have been there. It's a room that you go into, and it's pretty much like a perpetual installation. It always looks like this at any time of the day when it's open. But it's playing the resonant frequencies of the room itself and pairing it with color. So there's an interesting correlation to this prismatic notion of tonality or sound and acoustic resonance that is actually also a color frequency resonance, which is really interesting. And then Max Neuhauer as well, who has the water whistle series, who has these interesting ways of sound propagation as well. You don't think of them just as reflecting off walls and going through the air, but here's propagation in water. Okay, so moving on, phase 2, the final phase. And we're back to that notion of the logic of extraction. This is a quote from Dylan Robinson's book, Hungry Listening, where he says, "Hungry listening prioritizes the capture and certainty of information over the effect of feel, timbre, touch, and texture of sound. Attending to affect alongside normative listening habits and biases allows us to imagine or ideate otherwise, to develop strategies for different transformative politics of listening." So Dylan's really interested in positionality, and he's really interested in settler forms of listening that are repeating colonial structures and colonial extractions of indigenous music. And a lot of his examples revolve around how operas, for instance, in the past have taken indigenous music and recorded it as their own, and not realizing that the content in these excerpts are actually sacred. So what happens now during a process of repatriation is we need to kind of destroy all these existing records of these instances where the sacred music has actually been used out of context. So I think he's really interesting because he talks about listening from a point of extraction. You know, whenever we listen to something, we're used to, you know, trying to gain some kind of information from it, somebody to gain some benefit from it. He gives an example in his book, actually, where he says, yeah, you know, you're reading my book, but basically the first entire paragraph or first entire chapter is not for you unless you're an indigenous person, right? So, you know, that idea that a book is there for you to extract knowledge from, and I can refer to it whenever I want, I own it. You know, he's kind of turning that on its head and saying, well, there are some parts of this book that are not for you. And in the same way, you know, a lot of sound in this world is not for you. You know, so in that sense, you know, with that idea of what listening can be, you know, if listening is not an extraction of information, then what is it? And I would propose that it is this formation of the relationship that comes as a function of its acoustic resonance, as we talked about previously, you know, with the walls and its vibrations, but also as a communication between source and sink, between the person who's making the sound and the person who's listening to it. So the motivation for this talk itself, you know, really came from a presentation I was at actually by Marcia Brennan just about a month ago. And Marcia's really amazing. Let me give you a bit more information here. She's an artist in residence in palliative care at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So in a hospital setting, she assists patients and their caregivers in constructing meaningful stories to express their insights and experiences. As the patients and I produce poetic narratives together, my role can best be described as that of a scribe and a curator of thought, as I ask questions and record the responses they inspire. Yet, much of what I record is ineffable. So I think it's really interesting to note that you know, from a sound perspective, like the first thing she's saying about it is that it's, you know, you can't really capture the real meaning and intent in everything that you hear. It's not something that you can extract knowledge from and information from comprehensively. There's always something that you don't get. And so art presents a really interesting affordances for somebody to explore those ideas. This is an example of the story that one of the story that she tells. It's called Between the Water and Sky. For my children, I'd like you to know how much I love the water. That has a special place in my heart. There is nothing better than the sun coming up in the morning. And in this picture, I'm wearing a light blue shirt, something between the water and the sky. Her work involves such an intense listening positionality, where she sits beside patients, sometimes at their deathbeds, and asks them questions that are really open-ended. You know, what would you like to share? What would you like to say? What would you like to tell somebody? And often, you know, really the most poetic and beautiful stories emerge. And she works with an illustrator, Lynn Smallwood, who would put these to the page. So, you know, it's really interesting because when Marcia was here, we chatted a little bit about sound. And because, you know, I have a real interest in soundscapes and recording soundscapes. And we talked a little bit about the soundscape at this point of interviewing and what it sounded like. And she said she was very conscious to that, as a lot of people are. And it's increasing as well nowadays. You know, we're thinking about the noise in hospitals and how that affects the recovery rate of patients. And she said, you know, it was really important to have something that was familiar to them, something that they could remember. And so she would often play some music, very, very soft music, very calming music. That was something that they had predetermined to be familiar. Or they would just have very, very simple classical music. They would remove some of the beeps and boops of all the machinery, and they would try to make it as calm a place as possible. So there are a number of projects that are looking at the noise pollution levels in hospitals, and I wanted to put this there just to you know, think about care as a function of the sound that you hear, because Marcia was very clear when she talked about the importance of sound, especially in somebody who's receiving care in a hospital. And she also says that, you know, hearing is one of the first senses you have, and that's also the pretty much the last sense to go. So she was also telling us to make sure, if you're ever in this position, like, do not say anything that you would not say to the person face to face, because they can hear you. And I kind of like this project quite a bit. This is the Hospital Project on Noise, Sound and Sleep that was conducted in King's College in London, because it also had an interdisciplinary team that included Angus Carlisle and John Wynn, who are both front runners in the British sound art scene, part of a group called CRESUP, Creative Research Practices and Creative Research in Sound Art Practices. So this is John Wynn with another project called Transplant and Life. And, you know, he's really thinking about the soundscape of the hospital and the soundscape of the patient's room. And he's asserting that the voice is actually a very important part of it. And so he conducts interviews in this project, at least he was conducting interviews with transplant receivers. And then in the ensuing gallery exhibition, he basically put their voices and their faces up there as well. It really humanizes that, really shows the unfolding relationships, unfolding environments that care and that care kind of takes place or plays out within. I have another project which will bring us back to the initial image, the initial title image that I had, and I want to think about oral narratives a little bit more. So in 2015, I was in Seattle, and it was basically the height of the human migration crisis, and you'll remember that it was a terrible time, and also there were a lot of undocumented migrants that were landing in Seattle at that time as well, and contributing very much to the homelessness crisis that we had. And in response to that, ICE, the Immigration Checkpoints Enforcement Agency, basically started ramping up their random checks and incarcerating people in the Northwest Detention Center, which is just south of Seattle in this idyllic Tacoma city. So, I was very, very disturbed, and I had a couple of friends as well who were undocumented. I was a student in UW, and so we knew some people who were, and we also knew around town there was an arts organization called Casa Latina that actually sheltered undocumented migrants and gave them work, helped them connect to employees for odd jobs and stuff, and they also had a residency program with this particular artist. I sat down with him and I talked to him quite extensively about his experiences moving over. And he's from Oaxaca, and his family have all been naturalized as Americans already, but he's still undocumented. So he's always living in fear that he would one day leave. And I wanted to find out more, and I wanted to know more, but I didn't necessarily want to know the legal side of it. I wanted to know the people behind it. So I enrolled as a volunteer in the Northwest Detention Center to be a befriender to people behind bars. I mean, they didn't, of course, officially they're not behind bars, but they were incarcerated indefinitely. And so I did it was a stretch of time before I eventually had to leave because I came to Toronto. And what I was doing is I was on a weekly basis, I would go into the detention center and sit down in front of a glass pane and talk to people across that about about their travels. And a lot of them had no family, they had no friends, and even if they were being released, which was very few and far between. But they would end up in this real kind of deserted area with no friends, no phone, no food, no shelter, no clothes. And so a lot of the advocacy around this was also in trying to make sure they had there was a bus that was there that we would collect clothes to put in, and then these people who managed to come out would then be able to get a clean change of clothes, would get a phone call, and basically a taxi ride to a hotel downtown. And so that culminated in a work entitled "Between Us a Breeze" that was literally an extension. When we started, we were talking about this computer screen as a veil of glass that's preventing me from understanding more about you, right? All of us are in these pigeonholes right now, these galleries of cubes. And so, this piece really kind of spoke about the distance between that glass itself, that institutional structure, and how could we create a form of, beauty between that. So in this installation, there's a phone. You can pick up the phone and talk to the person on the other line. And as you talk, your voice is actually creating ripples on the water. So it actually basically is pushing water out from you, and then on the other side is also pushing water out, responding to the frequencies and the amplitudes in your voice as well. And then they're kind of colliding in really, I guess, really calm and hopefully beautiful ways. And when you were listening to this as well, there would be an undertow of the soundscape of some protest chants that were happening in the city around that time. Okay, so I'm nearing the end. I feel like we can kind of feel how this is wrapping up a little bit, and I want to move into what I would like us to do, together in the next segment of it, next half of the workshop. This is taken from another project that I was running with a class that I did in music composition back in Washington. But this is the example, right? So it was to conduct an interview with a friend or family member and discussing what his or her earliest sonic memory is. We kind of remember a lot of our lives through photographs now. And, if you've grown up in a particular age, it's impossible to get away from it. In fact, like a lot of the memories that I have of my children are now, indirectly from the photographs that I've taken. It's kind of, I think that's a bit of a shame, but it is what it is, right? So, but what is your earliest sonic memory? So the interview doesn't have to be audio recorded. Basically, it was a text transcript that was then creatively set to sound, build a sonic profile of this memory. Likewise, a lot of these memories were not just like moments or interactions, they were a lot about space. So I have two examples over here that I want to play for you. These are examples of students' works, which were great. So I will turn one on now. My interview subject recalled the sounds of a wooden playset that he had built with his father. The playset represented fond memories of playing. It brought up nostalgic feelings of his childhood. Its wood was smooth and stained, but became more rough and splintered over time. It sat in his sun-drenched backyard. My sound piece particularly focused on play, nostalgia, and the passage of time. The beginning of the piece establishes a warm, playful, and inviting environment. Over time, the environment becomes more harsh and hostile, but it's always brought back with sounds of nostalgia. And the second one, I will not read this, but I'll let it play out because it's pretty long. So in closing, we are going to do a sonic meditation, but not this one. I brought this up because we started talking about hungry listening and the logic of extraction. And how are we going to realize where our information, our desire, or our hunger for information is clouding the way we listen and not allowing us to feel or to allow the textures and the timbres and the affect of the sound to actually trigger our imagination and our memories. So this is a small meditation by Ellen Waterman. But after this, we're going to go and have an actual sonic meditation led by Mick. And this one says, pause now and sit quietly for a moment. Consider your roots and acknowledge your prejudices, your shame, your fear, and your longing. Set them aside, still your hungry listening, and listen. I think that phrase is really important. Still your hungry listening, still it. Here are some of the references that I've had in preparing for this. So thank you all for sitting through that. It went a little longer than I thought, but I hope you got something out of it. Definitely, I love sharing about this so much, and it means so much more to me now that we live this stuff. Could I want to open this up real quick for a short 2 or 3 minute round of questions. If you have any, feel free.
So I had one question. First, it's phenomenal to see what you've done with sound and your analysis of sound. It definitely has changed the way that I'm starting to think about sound. What I wonder is that so much value you're able to get out of sound. And I would say typically the general public, they maybe miss that value or that information. Is there more sensitivities to sound because of that knowledge, because of that understanding?
Yeah, I want to say that you know, for me, it's a kind of a question of like the art and science divide. Like, you know, if you think about Richard Feynman, somebody asked him, you know, like, how do you define what beauty in a flower is? And if you know exactly what the processes in there are, does that make it more beautiful? Does it make it more sensitive to the intricate elegance in that system? And he said yes. And I would say the same thing. You know, I think just like that project on hospital ambience and noise there, you know, there was this really beautiful collusion of resources, both artistic and scientific, where you were able to heighten everybody's response to what was going on. You know, it changed everybody's perspectives. You know, I think we live in a time where this has to be a given for any major problem that we're facing. You know, the artists can talk to the scientists, and scientists can talk to the artists. Yeah. And Mick, feel free to answer as well. You know, I knew you might have some thoughts too.
It was a beautiful response. I don't have anything to add at this moment, but yeah.
I have a question about the colonial structures that inform a resource extraction approach to listening versus the alternative that you presented today. Are there any intentional practices that you have in your either artistic life as well as in your academic life that you are dismantling some of those more, I guess, like I mentioned, colonial structures and ways of listening, such that we're moving away from resource extraction, being more having more intention when we are engaging with sound and engaging with narrative, for example, in the form of spoken word?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I want to be honest that a lot of the inspiration that I took was from Dylan, because Dylan is a sound scholar and he's a sound studies scholar. And so his perspective is on that. Like prior to meeting him and hearing from him, I would have never known that there was an opera in Canada that has appropriated an Indigenous death song, a song, a transitional song, right, from death to the afterlife, that was appropriated in the opera as a lullaby. So you know, there was serious issues over there to the point where it was actually violence enacted, you know, on the Indigenous. So I will say though that there's a lot of similarities, or there are a lot of similar metaphors in the logic of extraction when it comes to environmental sciences. And that's where I think I'm a lot more interested in. Mick and I kind of see a lot of this, you know, with his works in water and my work in air, where we think about this policy of engineering, this logic of engineering, that when there's a problem, I guess we could engineer it. We find a solution by engineering, and that's not always bad, right? You know, I believe that we are in a synthetic world. You know, Christopher Preston talks about like this being the Plastocene, the Anthropocene is the humans, and then now we're all, you know, everything is about creating different infrastructures from the ground up. You know, so it's all kind of malleable and plastic. But there's in terms of the way that the Indigenous thinking is impacting this. There's an ethics, I guess, of renewal in Indigenous studies that does not come into like colonial practices. When you think about plastic, there's this indefinite material. So Jason Lewis and Suzanne Kite talk about this the ethics of extraction. I don't think they use the word extraction. It's the ethical ways to deal with the environment. And you think about 7 generations into the future, everything has a death, a lifespan. So everything will have a death at this point. And are you being ethical to the generations, to the people or to the environment 7 generations down the road? You know. And I really think that's a beautiful way to think about the world, and just to continually emphasize the accountability that we need to have.
But maybe we have an accountability to all of us, and I don't want to say all lives matter or all sounds matter, but I do feel that, and it has to do with technology, and has to do with the sort of self-generation of the insults and injuries upon the planet, but I feel like I feel that there's a colonization that sound perpetrates on everyone. And when you talked about the hospital sounds, I feel like the hospital colonizes, you know, through noise and dissonance and decibels. It sort of colonizes the hospital, and that everybody, whether it's the nurses, the doctors, or the patients, are all, you know, like victims essentially of this abstract colonization.
You know, totally. And I think that's the basis for a lot of the like the sonic warfare innovations that are going on right now. You know, sonic beams that are being shot at across the waters, you know, because the ultrasonic frequencies travel much faster than and much more benign, I guess, than a rocket, much less destructive and a lot more focused. There's a lot of that going on. Seeing how sound can be that oppressive presence. But you know, I also think that one of the outcomes of that study, particular study in noise pollution, was the realization that it's inevitable that when you're in a place like this, that there will be a minimum amount of soundscape. You know, so there's this dance between like understanding what the sound is, seeing if you can reduce it. If you can't reduce it, then finding a way to mask it. So one of their strategies was to have these like pillars of more sound, you know, believe it or not, that would mask the sound of the synthetic machines. And they actually conducted studies. Ironically, I think that people actually preferred the sounds of nature that were used to mask the sounds of yeah, you know, I don't know how far we've come. I mean, the last time I checked, you know, we were thinking about nanotechnology as a way to create noise canceling machines next to airports and wind farms, you know, to dampen the vibration, the low frequency hums, right? So I'm not sure where we are at that, but yeah, you're right. You know, all sounds and sounds don't stop for no one. They don't care about a concentric circle or proximal. You know, there's no 6 feet social distancing for that, right?
Exactly. I did have another.
Almost the idea.
Oh, I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say silence is privilege. Like you think about in the American healthcare system, how sometimes you can have a room to your on your own, or for example, in airports, where if you are privileged and you can afford it, you can go to quieter spaces that aren't having announcements, and that has real impacts on people's health in real ways that people move through the world. So that's just another layer on top of soundscape, that those who can thwart the soundscape have inherent privilege above those who can't, and those that are subject to it. So we have almost we have a responsibility to those to make that soundscape as pleasurable as possible. Or as
Yeah, totally. And that's reminding me of those taxis in London where they started fixing these speakers inside, you know, that were transducing the sound of the city into these pleasurable tones. Not sure if you've seen them. There were taxi cabs that would drive around and play, you know, something that's counter to what you were hearing on the street. It wasn't noise; it was musical, but it was generated from the noise. Some might say it was adding to the noise, right?
Well, I mean, all of these discussions are sort of, you know, generate thoughts, but like I was just thinking now when you were talking about I remember some artist who did what he called discard studies, where he took noises that were like from the perpetrators of ecological damage, like oil, you know, like concrete mixers and just all these sounds. I mean, we talk about throwing things away like plastic or junk or whatever, but that noise itself is also a way of discarding, sort of the discarding result of activities that destroy the environment. And so, you know, sometimes people don't think of sounds that way, but like if you think about leaf blowers, and that you know, that's leaf blowers create, I mean, one doesn't think of leaf blowers as creating, you know, spewing out CO2, which they're terrible about that. But the discard aspect of it is the noise. So it's just interesting to think of noise as a kind of something that's like plastic or waste that gets thrown away. But yeah, so that was one
Yeah.
thought. The other thought I had, and we'll just, I mean, we can leave it because other people have a right to talk, but the other thing that I was thinking about was the stethoscope that you're talking about, and, you know, that it changed the relationship to the body by listening to sounds inside the body, but we've really moved well beyond this stethoscope, and now we just send everybody to imaging. And I was wondering what thoughts you had about that, because that's not, you know, the imaging is you remove the patient, not only the physical patient, but the sonar patient, and just find out everything you need to know by putting them in some kind of a machine. Anyway, so sorry about all that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's an interesting perspective, and you know, uh, I, I I don't really have a response to that. I know that technology needs to progress in a certain way so that we can increase the quality of healthcare and the quality of life. And I'm you know, I mean, we all know people who depend on these structures in order to survive. So there's nothing that can be said. You know, this maybe the same way that we can't say too much about pharmaceuticals right now because we need the vaccine. um, but you know, I feel like at Sensorium, we have this thing that we say nowadays, you know, like because of COVID, everybody's on digital, blah, blah, blah. Everybody wants to digitize their artworks. They want to go VR. And we have this thing called return to the sensorium, that we're always trying to look for ways to re-engage people with their immediate environments and their sensory apparatus as well. Right now, when I'm sitting here looking at you and listening to you guys, my body, my entire body is my eyes and my ears. That's it. I don't know what's going on in my feet. I don't know what's going on in my bum. But what we try to do, like when we have a workshop like this, we send out a care package that has a sonic or some kind of meditation that you actually need to get off your seat and outside. And sometimes you have to sit down and feel some leaves in a tree in order to do it. And when we have the workshop itself, you know, then it becomes a different experience because you're sharing what your sensory experience is. And then like when you hear about somebody's fingers being pricked by the leaves of the great white pine, for instance, your fingers like feel that too, you know, it tingles, right? So yeah.
I wanted to ask a question. The picture behind you, are those physical hot air balloons? I wanted the noise that they would make. Are people in them? And did you take the photo?
No, I didn't. This was part of a gallery exhibition at the Art Science Museum in Singapore called Inflatables. And it's actually just a documentation photo. It was a photo of the North Korean and South Korean border. I can't remember which date it was, but they were trying to send messages to each other across the border. And this was how they did it.
Okay.
It was recent though. Yeah,
so how large would those, say, containers or balloons be?
They were about human height.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe about 5 or 6 feet in height. Yeah, I mean the bottom of that photo actually has some people in it, so you could see.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so this is going to be probably the best part of the workshop. I'm going to turn it over to Mick for about 10 minutes now, or 10 to 15 minutes, and he's going to lead us in a sonic meditation.
All right, thank you, Joel. So for this part of the meditation, before we even start the meditation, please just stand up for a moment and move however you feel move to move. Feel your extremities. Take some deep breaths. And beginning the meditation, keep your eyes closed. You can remain standing for this meditation or sit back down, whatever feels good to you. You can be swaying. However your body wants to be positioned, listen to it. But I highly recommend for you to close your eyes and begin to notice sensations within your body. If you have earphones on, like I do, just make sure one of your earbuds is out, or just take out your earphones completely and listen to my voice through the computer. Notice any vibrations and sounds within your body. Be mindful of your breath. Notice any emotions and thoughts. How they might be related to the sounds and vibrations within you. Slowly begin to shift your focus to the space around your body. Considering the vibrations and sounds in that space around your body. Allowing your awareness to expand into the room. Noticing maybe there are emotions or memories that emerge as you expand your awareness into the space, into the sounds and vibrations that you notice in the space. And continue to extend your awareness out beyond the walls of the room, the building. Can you sense something of the weather, of activity? Outside. Now notice all of the sensations from the inside of the body all the way out, as far as your awareness can extend, how all these sounds and vibrations overlap each other. And just notice deeply for the next minutes. And take a deep breath in and exhale. And slowly open your eyes and get any paper, or you can type directly to your computer. If you have a paper and pencil, jot down any sensations that you can remember from the meditation, any emotions, any thoughts, and specifically the sounds that you noticed.
I could go first. Just to kick the ball rolling. Found it very interesting. I'm in a very quiet part of the house right now, and my street's actually pretty quiet as well. So it was perfect to focus in on my internal structures. But I think the most interesting thing happened when you gave the prompt to open up to your immediate environment in front of you, and I suddenly started hearing the clock. And it was really interesting. I was like, okay, the clock is here. Okay, the clock is here. The clock is here. And then I started thinking about the clock. You know, the clock's reminding me of certain things. It sounds very much like the metronome that I had when I was a kid. And of course, my Asian parents made me play the piano, and lots of fun memories of that, and not so fun ones as well. But then I also realized that there is no clock in front of me, and the clock is actually behind me. So I had my eyes closed and I was listening to the reflection of the clock tick in front of me, thinking that it was in front of me. So I was like, whoa, that's cool.
I thought it was really funny when Mick and Joel and I met before we actually had the workshop. Mick heard this hum in my kitchen, and it was my freezer, I think. And immediately when we started the meditation, it stopped buzzing. It was buzzing this entire time, but right when we started it, it stopped buzzing. So the only thing I could hear then was some wind that was blowing back in my alley. But I thought that that was really funny that we had noticed that before in preparation, and it completely disappeared during that.
I had a similar situation with the clock, which I've been sitting here this whole time and haven't heard it. But I heard it as I was meditating. And I, too, thought that it was over here and actually peaked, but it's over here. So, yeah, that's really cool that the sound just moved. And also now that we're back speaking, I can keep hearing the clock. You know, I still hear it, but I never did hear it this whole time.
I guess I can go next maybe. I live on Jasper Ave, which is a fairly busy street in Edmonton. So there's almost a constant hum in my left ear when I was meditating. And I could also hear the dryer that's just kind of on the other side of the wall for me. And I couldn't help but feel the thought of, I was listening to the vibrations kind of in my stomach and also listening to the urban ecology around me. And I felt like an invasive species. Like I felt like my body and the sounds I was getting from inside my body were completely at odds from what I was hearing around me. And it just felt like, yeah, it just felt like they were almost out of phase with one another, which I felt was very strange. And I'd never really thought about kind of moving in my apartment.
I can go next. So it was really interesting because when I started, my thoughts were kind of everywhere, and I didn't really, think I would be able to kind of channel them and just focus on my sound. But it kind of just happened all of a sudden, all at once. I was finally aware that my window was open, and I could hear tires on the road, and the road's actually not behind me. It's actually once again in front of me spatially, like in where I am in my house. And then it was really interesting because there was a moment when I kind of tuned Mick out as well. And I just kind of remembered a childhood memory. I was 3 or 4, I think, just coloring with my sister. And we used to have a train track right outside our window. And so I just suddenly had these like images pop up of kind of the wind just blowing and the train going past on the tracks. And it's funny because I don't even remember what we were coloring or drawing, but that sound is just so vivid, and it just came back just in that certain moment all of a sudden, and I really wasn't expecting it. So yeah, thanks Mick, that was awesome.
For me, I had a plane pass overhead partway through, which was really interesting because presumably hundreds of planes have passed me today and I haven't noticed a single one. I guess I just extract the information that that's a plane and I let it go. But it was shocking how loud it was just sitting in my apartment and how overwhelming. And it was this weird moment where the most dominant thing I could sense was this plane. And it was kind of this weird intimate moment with 70 passengers that don't know I exist, but their passage was the main thing that I was noticing. Thousands of meters below.
So I belong to, I've done some meditation for a long time. And one of the meditation exercises is listening to sounds. And I remember the Dharma teacher saying, listen to the space between sounds, which is kind of an odd, it's fine if a sound is very intermittent, but if it's constant, then what does that mean? And I have had a condition called tinnitus ever since I was, in my teens, which is, this, it's kind of an unclear etiology, but it could be related to hearing damage. But in any case, it's a sound that you have in all the time. So I have this constant sort of high-pitched buzzing sound in my ears. So I'm never in quiet. But one thing I do notice in these situations is that even though I hear the tinnitus, I also hear the quiet. And so maybe hearing the tinnitus and hearing the quiet is a way of hearing the space between sound.
I guess I can go next. I also heard my watch, and it as if like time froze for a quick moment. I realized the watch, and that's all I could hear. But I guess what grabbed my attention the most was the crispness of ordinary sounds. For example, my office chair that I'm sitting on, and it moving as I sat or as my body's vibrating and the chair vibrating, like it just became a lot more dominant. I've never heard it that way before. So the crispness of ordinary sounds is that I think was quite surreal.
I can share. I was, hello everybody. I was transported. My partner walked by and it was moving the floorboards, and it was a vibration, and I was standing and my body wanted to do a bit of a dance because of the vibration and the sound of the boards. But I was immediately transported to a memory I had of in Stockholm when David Byrne was playing the building. He had strung up this whole building with wires and all sorts of devices. And as I was hearing these boards make this vibration, it was reminding me of the sounds he was making through an organ at that time. It was like this momentary, I'm back there and then I'm back here again. So I was doing this in and out type of memory of, I'm here listening to my body, but I'm in my memory somewhere else.
That's amazing. I just want to point out also, this is Elaine Whittaker, everyone. She's the co-artistic director on the Proximal Spaces project, and it was her drawings that inspired a lot of the visualizations. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, I was just wondering if anybody wanted to share a sonic memory. Doesn't have to be the earliest ones. Maybe something that has recently come back to you.
I can't wait to tell you mine, so I'll go first, even though I don't want to rush in and elbow everybody out. But I mean, it's not that reason, but it's the only sonic memory I have that has had sort of, well, no, I mean, there are sounds having to do with medical training in general, like the beepers going off all the time. But when I was a resident, I was a single mother of 2 kids. And the only thing I could do with functioning between taking care of the kids and being on call at the hospital was to listen to a video or to play a video. And I would put the video cassette into this dual machine, which would take in the cassette and play it. And there was a special sound in which it received the cassette, processed it, and sort of like started it. And that sound was kind of like this ritual initiation into this limbo zone, which was kind of illegal and illicit because I really should be doing other things like taking care of my kids, but wasn't. And then I would fall asleep immediately, like in 10 minutes. But that sound, I mean, I wished I even had that sound because it was sort of iconic for me in a way that no other sound has ever had that kind of impact. And it was kind of related to the trauma of those years. But thanks for the opportunity to talk about this, since it's not exactly something that comes up in conversation very often.
I can share. I keep in my car console a wooden whistle, and when you blow it, it makes the exact sound of an old choo-choo train, and it just takes me to Heritage Park as a kid. I don't know how many of you guys have been there, but yeah, the old train would blow and we'd put pennies on the track, and I randomly will blow that as I go places. And yeah, it's a wonderful feeling. And even as a kid back in the day, when the arms would come down on a road so that the train could go by, back in the day, we would all get out of our vehicles. My dad, us kids, we'd walk to the front and we watched the train go by. Like, it was fascinating. And sometimes they would blow their whistle, but it's more the sound of the Heritage Park train, the old steam train. So yeah, thank you for this. I'm really enjoying this presentation.
I can go. I just remembered something from the meditation. I don't know if anyone has seen the new movie. It's the Disney Pixar movie Soul. But I really wanted to watch it because I love jazz music, and I was so fascinated by the topic of the movie. And I don't know, for me, I always think of jazz music as a type of music that's really, it really transports you, and I always thought of it as meditative, and I've loved jazz for so long. And I think it's not one of my earliest memories, but one of my strongest sonic memories is I made my brother and my dad go to this jazz concert in Calgary one time. And I was just like entranced by the drummer and the saxophone, and I was having the best time of my life. And I remember like 15 minutes in, I look over and they're both passed out. Like, they're just completely passed out in the concert. And I was just like having the best time of my life, and they were just completely asleep. And I don't know why that was such a funny and great memory for me, but yeah, jazz music, I think, is something that I find a really powerful sonic experience. And yes, that's a mini plug for that movie Soul, because Disney movies are spectacular.
Manisha, you talking there just had this searing memory and sound go through my head. It was amazing. So Sam and I went to the same high school, and when you're going through the grades, when you're in jazz band, you would be on before the grade before you. So you would be younger and you'd be walking through this really quiet high school, but you would hear the band above you playing jazz music, warming up to go out on stage. And it had this reverb quality to it, this like really lo-fi, muffled. There was almost like a filter, like someone put a low pass filter on this jazz as you're walking through the school that you usually inhabit with lots of people. And it's just such a clear memory for me that that was it was aspirational, because of course they're better than you. So you heard this better jazz and this beautiful lo-fi sound. So thank you for that, Manisha. Wow, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
That's making me think of the first movie I ever went to, which was Indiana Jones. The one with I think it was Sean Connery. I think so. Is that Raiders of the Lost Ark? Is that the one? Yeah.
So I grew up with cats, and for some reason, while I was practicing this meditation before even giving it, and then again during the meditation, the sound of my heart triggered memories of the cats laying on my chest and purring, and like how somehow the purring and my heartbeat would go into the same synchrony, synchronous rhythm, and it's a really, really soothing sensation. So I'm grateful for this workshop, for bringing me back to that method of meditation, because it's not something that I regularly practice. So I do teach yoga and such, but sonic meditation has a certain kind of treasure trove of memories associated with them, I think.
I just wanted to share something. So when Mick, you mentioned soothing, it's really interesting because I just thought of a sound that usually I would consider noise, especially if I'm studying or busy doing something. And it's the sound of sizzling in the kitchen, like something sizzling in oil. And it just reminds me of my mom making, like my favorite Indian food, or just like happy. Like it creates like a sense of warmth, like that feeling when I think about it now. Although usually when I'm actually experiencing it, I'll just kind of close my door because I'm studying and it seems like noise. But when I really just take the time to reflect on it, thanks to the workshop, I realized that it's actually probably one of my favorite sounds, because I feel like it's just so intimately kind of intertwined with like my family and my culture and just kind of happy memories, that I just realized that I'm actually really thankful to hear that noise around the house.
That's really wonderful. And I'm going to keep these memories for a long time, the vicarious sonic memories that I now have. Yeah, I'm not sure. Manisha, I don't really, I don't really have much else. If you guys want to follow up with some questions, that's great. Otherwise, I'm also happy if we, wanted to take some, like close the event as well.